Hey guys, it's Edmund here. For those of you who don't know, yesterday the first developer diary came out for BattleTech. And if you've been with Paradox for a while, you'll know that they do these developer diaries about changes which they're going to make or they're about to make. Anyway, they've changed the skill tree in BattleTech a fair amount, and you can beta test these changes by opening up the properties on BattleTech on Steam. I'm not quite sure how you do it on GOG, and opting into the beta. Anyway, they were asking for feedback on the new abilities, which a lot of people, and by a lot of people I mean like two, asked me what I thought of the new abilities, because, you know, I do all these crazy single-player challenge runs. So, Sensor Lock has been changed to add a small accuracy debuff, and that's fine. I mean, Sensor Lock was of marginal utility. This is just a little change that adds a little something extra to it, and whether that helps enough to make Sensor Lock sort of more viable remains to be seen. But it's fine. It's just a little change to a skill that wasn't quite as good as the others, so it got a little something extra, and that's exactly how a balance change should be done. However, the other three are pretty bad. I'm not gonna mince words here. So Bulwark has changed to effectively be super powerful if you guard. That's, you know, if you move and brace, or you gain the braced status somehow by bracing. The thing is, it's not. Basically, they've just put the same ability back into the game and removed Bulwark. So what I mean is, if you've watched me play, you've seen me do a move called brace jumping, which is where I jump in to a pile of enemies and I brace. And I do that to get line of sight, or maybe to get behind an enemy, or sometimes I brace jump out into the open to tank the enemy's turn so that I can then run out and return fire on them. So that ability, the ability that they've changed Bulwark to, already existed. They've just made it so that you can do it without jump jets. And then they've removed Bulwark from the game. And it's bad for many reasons. One is the obvious one that I've just said, which is that this ability was already in the game. You've just enabled it without jump jets. But the second one is, Bulwark is a crutch on which a lot of newer or less skilled players lean on. It's not as good as a proper evasive strategy, but it has some utility in that it's easy to understand, and it, you know, prevents one-shot kills or one-shot component blowouts because it's very reliable. And what I would have done, personally, was I would have just reduced the effectiveness of it from 50% maybe down to 30%, and then made it stack with cover, because one of the design objectives was that they said that cover wasn't important because Bulwark removed the need for cover. Well, simply make it so that if you're in cover and you have Bulwark and you're stood there, then it's slightly better than it used to be, or the same, depending on how you feel about the balance. I would make it slightly better, personally, because I think Bulwark actually is slightly worse than Evasion. But out of cover, you only get 30%. So it's kind of like you carry the forest with you, and if you are actually in forest, you get double forest. That's my thoughts on it. But effectively, this change has removed Bulwark from the game, because I would recommend that you take jump jets and you brace jump when you need that kind of defensive capability. So the ability to do that without jump jets is of marginal utility at best, especially when, of course, you're losing a skill and you're also losing jump jets. So I can't see the point of this ability at all. It will become Juggernaut, effectively, once people work that out. Coolant Vent is an absolutely insanely overpowered move, which, so we're all aware of the narcoleptic awesome, the sleepy mech, as it were. So what that is basically, you don't put any heat sinks on your mech, you just pile weapons onto it, preferably lots of high heat, high damage, low tonnage weapons like large lasers or medium lasers. You know, whatever you can stuff on there. You get like 700 alpha, and you just fire the lot of it, and you don't care about heat, and then you shut down, and then you restart, and then you do the whole thing again. And there's this whole thing about massive firepower for 1 or 2 turns, and then you're shut down and you're vulnerable. It was a very, very powerful strategy. Coolant Vent makes that strategy way better, and it was already insanely powerful. It was powerful in terms of utility in single player because it could help you win a fight that was going wrong, and in multiplayer it was absolutely insane because you don't have to worry about repair work or money or pilot injuries or anything. So you just throw it out there and you move on with your life. So this is probably the most overpowered ability ever introduced into this game, because it takes a build, the sleepy build, and it makes it twice as good, if not more, than it originally was. And it's going to be a very powerful ability even if you don't have a narcoleptic build. You know, if you just have a standard high heat build, or you have like a disco back or whatever, this potentially allows your disco back to carry on full alphaing forever. And you'll probably need to use Coolant Vent once every 3 turns to bring your heat down. And so you'll be alphaing away for maybe 9-10 turns uninterrupted, which is absolutely ridiculous. Lastly, Sure Footing, replacing Evasive move. This is a nerf to Evasion, because Evasive move was actually very good on... Perversely, it was one of these skills that worked better in the late game than the early game. It was a long-term skill. So in the early game, Evasive move would not necessarily add an evasive token because there's like a limit on the amount of evasive tokens you can have, and light mechs, fast mechs particularly, would have the full amount of evasion anyway. But assault mechs, especially ones that, you know, so if you build assault mechs like me, it's jump jets all the time. Jumpy assault mechs could maybe only get 2 or 3 evasion tokens at most, and this added a 4th one, or a 3rd one if you could only get 2. And that's actually pretty powerful for an assault. And that's just been taken away to effectively just make mechs harder to knock down, and only if they move, not if they jump or sprint or DFA. So it's another potentially useless ability. It might be powerful for a light or medium very early on when moving is enough movement and you have the speed to gain your evasion tokens just moving. But then that said, if you're getting hit in a light, you're probably already dead, or there's enough damage to actually rip your legs clean off. Honestly, I'm not sure what the point of this move is. It doesn't feel like it does anything, because since the change to stability that made assault mechs require 200 points to knock them down, they're very hard to knock down anyway. So having a situational ability that let you further increase their stability doesn't seem to have any value to me whatsoever. And so, in conclusion, I would just kind of say, Sensor Lock, great little change. Needed a little something extra, it got a little something extra. Bulwark is effectively removed from the game, and jump jetters will find themselves still jump bracing, which should be everybody in the base game, pretty much. And those players who are perhaps of lesser ability or just more new to strategy games will find that their crutch has kicked out from under them. Whereas perhaps what you wanted to do was encourage them to take advantage of terrain by maybe moving Bulwark to 30% and then saying, but if you're in a forest you get 60%, and encouraging those people to move into cover and take advantage of the terrain. But instead what this does is it just effectively removes Bulwark from the game. Then we have Coolant Vent, which is incredibly overpowered and makes an overpowered build even more overpowered, to the point that I'm pretty sure in a post-Coolant Vent universe, every multiplayer game with customization will involve narcoleptic snipers and other sleepy laser builds, which just alpha endlessly, max heat, cool it off, repeat until target is dead, especially with Bulwark effectively being removed. There's going to be very little way for a long range lance to tank the incoming damage from a laser lance. And finally, sure-footing honestly is going to be irrelevant. So that's just kind of another ability that has left the building. I thought Evasion was fine as it was, to be honest. Perhaps the only thing that I would say about Evasion is make it so that the Evasive ability preserves a couple of evasion tokens. So say it adds +1 evasion, which is great, and it also means that up to 3 evasion tokens can't be removed. Ones beyond that can be removed, so say you've got 4 or 5, those 2 can be removed and you're left with 3. But perhaps something like Evasion adds a minimum amount of evasion that can't be removed, plus it also adds an evasion token. You know, a little change like you did with Sensor Lock, just to make it a little bit more interesting. But instead, it's effectively been removed from the game and replaced with an ability which no one in their right mind would ever use. And I think my conclusion is that Bulwark and Surefooting are worse than Juggernaut, which is a profound statement coming from me, but I would never use either of them at all, ever again. And if I was redoing something insane like the AC2 campaign today, I wouldn't touch either of those abilities. I would be reaching for the coolant juice non-stop. And Sensor Lock, that little change, I quite like that. Does add a little bit to the power of the LRM spam builds. They're not so overpowered now that knockdown has been changed, and it's just a little something. So anyway, these are my thoughts on the changes. Let me know in the comments what you think of the changes, but this is my opinion based on all of my insane playthroughs and challenge runs and all that kind of stuff. So sort of understand that I exploit the game to its absolute nth degree, and these are my thoughts on these changes, which unfortunately I think the current set of abilities overall is actually better than these ones. Although I do like the Sensor Lock change, I think that's the correct change, as in make a little change, make it a little bit better, and that's it, and just see how that plays out. But the other ones are basically either extremely overpowered or extremely weak, simply because there are things that already exist in the game that cover what these abilities bring to the table. So there you go. Hope you found this interesting or useful. This is just a quick one because it was requested. So enjoy, and I will catch you next time.